Good morning, church. Welcome to this edition of Checking In with Pastor Jim. It is Wednesday, June the 17th, 2020. And today would have been my dad's 89th birthday. Dad died a little over 6 years ago. Some of you may remember when that happened. I certainly remember when that happened in January of 2014. But today would have been his birthday, so I woke up this morning thinking about him and realizing that the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. You've heard that saying before? I was just thinking about my dad's life and how it influenced my life. On my mother's birthday, I can tell you a whole different set of stories. But my dad, he was born in, I think, Cross Hill, South Carolina, back in 1931, and his father used to write to him on his birthday and say, "Your birth brought on one of the hottest spells we had ever had in those parts." And my dad would always smile when he read that. Only later did he realize that his mother, little Hattie Nottingham Somerville, must have been in the upstairs room of that Presbyterian parsonage, struggling, laboring to bring forth a son in one of the hottest seasons they had ever had, with no air conditioning, maybe not even a fan. There she was. So my dad thought about her and felt sympathy for her in those later years that he didn't feel in the early years. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister, Walter Gray Somerville, who came to Union Presbyterian Seminary back in the early days of the 20th century. He talked his classmates into going off and serving as chaplains during World War I, and then came back and finished up his education. I think he graduated in about 1920. And then he and my grandmother, Hattie, served churches mostly in North and South Carolina. Anyway, my father would say that his father was a fundamentalist Presbyterian preacher. He held to the 5 fundamentals of the Christian faith as established by the Niagara Conference in the previous century. My dad grew up feeling kind of constrained by all that fundamentalism. He was probably one of those preacher's kids you hear about who wanted to bust out of the traces and explore the world on his own, experience life in a different way than his pious and fundamentalist father. He never thought he would be a preacher, but he ended up going to Columbia Presbyterian Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. And when he graduated from there, he went off to serve churches in Alabama, of all places, first in Troy and then in a little place called Hayneville, Alabama. That's where I was born, not in Hayneville, but in Selma, which was not far away. And my parents brought me back to Hayneville, and my first year and a half were spent there. So that's where my father got in trouble with his church and with the community, and it started, I think, when someone asked him, as the new preacher in town, if he would like to say the opening prayer at a meeting of the White Citizens Council. Now, I know I've told this story before, and some of you could probably quote it, but my father said, "What is the White Citizens Council for?" And this man looked at him, surprised. This was in about, 1958, 59. Looked at him and he said, "Well, you know what it's for. It's to keep those people in their place." Only he didn't say those people. He used another word that I can't repeat. So my dad said, "Well, no thank you. I think I'm going to decline that invitation." And later, when somebody asked him about it, why didn't you say the opening prayer at a meeting of the White Citizens Council? He said, "Because honestly, I didn't think Jesus would say the opening prayer at that meeting." Jesus may not have been invited to say the opening prayer at that meeting, but my father didn't go into that. Anyway, that was the beginning, and then things got worse. There was this idea going around among the Presbyterian churches at that time that maybe black people ought to be allowed to join white churches And my dad tried to float that idea to his elders one evening at a meeting of the session. And he remembers clearly that one of them looked at him and said, "Now, preacher, I don't know what they taught you at that seminary up there in Atlanta, but down here we only got one kind of religion, and it's that good old Southern religion." Dad remembered that for years and years afterward. I don't think he ever forgot that. He said it just chilled his blood when he heard it because he knew what it meant. It meant no black people allowed, not now, not ever. So Dad kept thinking that church should be open. The Church of Jesus Christ should be open to everybody God loves, and that's everybody. And the pressure increased, and eventually the Ku Klux Klan came and burned a cross in front of our house. Ku Klux Klan was really active in Lowndes County, Alabama back in those days. Some of you may know that or recall that. But they burned a cross in front of our house, and we missed the whole thing. Apparently slept through it all. The next morning, my mother was in the kitchen, and the phone rang, and one of our neighbors asked, "Are you all right?" And she said, "Why would I not be all right?" And she said, "Well, the Klan burned a cross in front of your house." And I've told you this story, how my dad got up when my mother roused him. He put on his bathrobe and his slippers, and he went out there and poked around in the ashes of that cross with the toe of one slipper. Came back in the house and said to my mother, "Well, it sure was a little one." So he was being cavalier about all of that, but the pressure increased and threats started to come, and eventually they began to threaten my dad's little family, those 3 young boys who were in the house and his beautiful wife. And Dad thought it might be best to get out of Lowndes County, Alabama. So loaded up the car and put the doghouse on top of that 1953 green and white Ford Fairlane. Put our dog Lady inside the doghouse. She'd just given birth to 5 little puppies. All of them in there. Dad nailed up a piece of plywood over the top, and off we went to Wise County, Virginia. And my dad served as pastor of a little Presbyterian church in Wise for about 5 years. That's kind of where I came to consciousness and became aware of my surroundings, and had a good friend, my best friend, Bobby Thompson, in those days. Anyway, I don't want to go on forever, and I can't. I'm looking at the clock and realizing I've got just a couple more minutes. Dad served that church for about 5 years, and then you may remember Lyndon Johnson started this war on poverty. And someone recommended my dad as a foot soldier in the war on poverty. And he was contacted, I think, by local government officials and asked to help out. And so he began to work with people right there in Wise County, Virginia. He got in trouble there because he suggested that maybe black people should be paid as much as white people for equal work. We left Wise, Virginia under the cover of darkness. No doghouses on top of the car this time, but we went off and stayed at my grandmother's unheated cabin in the winter of 1966. And then eventually came on into West Virginia, where Dad started work with something called the West Virginia Mountain Project, an initiative of the Presbyterian Church to end poverty in Boone County, West Virginia, one of the poorest counties in the nation. I've got this old newspaper clipping about my dad when he was working there in West Virginia. Let me put it up for you. Do you see that? Lightning rod for controversy. Among Boone County's establishment, the reputation of the Reverend James Somerville as a troublemaker has been firmly established. Oh my goodness. It was because he was trying to get free lunches for poor kids who didn't have enough food to eat. Well, now you know, folks. The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. My dad was a troublemaker. Sometimes I have the reputation of being a troublemaker, but I mean it in the very best way. I mean that every person God created has worth and value. Every single person should be treated with dignity. Everyone. No exceptions. That's my motto, and I'm sticking to it. But I see now where I got it, lots of it from my dad, also from my mother. Madeline Lingle said one time, "You have a point of view, I have a point of view, God has view." And I think what she meant was, I grew up in a certain place with a certain set of circumstances and experiences that have shaped me as the person I am. And you grew up where you did with certain circumstances and experience that shaped you as the person you are. You and I may see things differently. We may be on the opposite side of issues. We may vote for different people when it's time to go to the polls. I have a point of view, you have a point of view. But Madeline Lingle says God has view. God sees everything. God knows everything. And maybe our calling as Christians is to raise our sights and to begin to see the world more with God's eyes than ours. To look at people, to look at situations through the eyes of God and see if we can develop His kind of view. It won't be easy for us. We come from different places. We've had different experiences. But may that be our goal, to lift our sights, to begin to see the world as God sees it. God, who loved the world so much, He gave His only begotten Son for people like you and me, no matter our point of view. I hope today is a great day for you. Tomorrow is Thursday. It's my day off. I'm going to see if I can find somebody else to come check in with you. Maybe you could nominate somebody from the floor to do the check-in. Put it in the comments section over here and just say, hey, what about this one? What about that one? We'd like to hear from them. But I'll be taking a day off, probably spending it over at my daughter's house, bouncing my baby grandson on my knee, little Leo. What a joy. Hope tomorrow is a joy for you. Hope today is as well. And I'll see you tonight at Bible study. Bye for now.